And welcome to this NFL Combine version of the Still Curtain podcast. I am your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of Still Curtain. Joining me, as always, is Shayne Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. We've got the first big offseason event upon us right now, the 2023 NFL Combine. First year without Kevin Colbert on hand as general manager. So I'm interested to see what the Steelers scouting is going to look like in terms of that. Starting today off, as we speak right now, interviews going on with the defensive linemen and linebackers. The rest will come later in the week. So we, at this point of the time of recording, we don't have any measurements or times or anything else. They didn't do drills. This is ahead of that. And so we'll recap that stuff and we'll rehash that next week. But let's talk about the NFL Combine for a minute, Shayne. How do you think that's going to go with the Steelers this year? Do you see any difference now that they have new management in the front office?
I mean, I think there's obviously going to be some amount of difference here, but I don't think it's going to be anything too crazy. I know that he already mentioned, Omar Khan will talk about a little bit later, that for the most part, there's not going to be anything that's too crazy different between him and Colbert. They worked together for a long time. Steelers don't really change things too much, as we know. We've kind of become accustomed to that. But I think overall, the thing I'm looking to see is, do we see more of an emphasis on the trenches? Because Andy Weidl's influence is in there. We'll talk about him more, too. Some news with him. Do we see more of an emphasis towards that? Because I think that could be the biggest difference we see, at least in this first full year without Colbert, is kind of trying to get to that level of trying to beef up the front seven and get the offensive line in a better place for this running attack that they've tried to build. So
I agree with you there. And I think that it'll be interesting to note these changes. Again, this is the first time that we're really not going to have a clear idea exactly how Steelers are going to do things during the offseason in terms of when it comes to scouting and the scouting trail. However, Mike Tomlin is still there. And I have to imagine that things are pretty much going to fall in line more or less with how they were before. We're going to talk about Omar Khan, some of the statements that he made just yesterday at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. And he kind of hinted towards he's going to be a lot like Kevin. And so we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Shayne, let's talk about some of the biggest things to watch this week. So for the viewers, what are some of the things we should be looking at the NFL Combine? And I'll start with one, Shayne. We can kind of just go back and forth and fire off some of the things that we want to see this week. And I wrote an article about this the other day. I think one of the biggest single things, if we're kind of being specific here, that we can be looking at for specifically in how it relates to the Steelers is Peter Skoronski's arm length. And we're talking about the Northwestern offensive tackle. Where does that come in at? Because there's just a lot of research. There's a lot of evidence out there. There are some rumors that suggest that his arms might come in at 32 inches on the dot. Shayne, there's been like 7 players ever that have entered the NFL Combine at the offensive tackle position that have had 32-inch arms. None have come in below that, according to Mock Draftable's database. That is an outlier in the very sense of the definition. And so if that's the case with a guy like Skoronski, how does that change your opinion on him?
I think really the opinion change is just going to be, do you think it's even viable to play him at tackle or is it not? That's like, do you even want to try to play him at tackle? Because if you think he could still play tackle, even if he comes in at 32 inches, then it might be worth drafting him a little bit higher than you would otherwise, because he is technically going to be a projection to play inside, even though I think he can. I think he'll be great inside if he has to play there. It really is going to change like his draft value, right? Because you look at guard versus tackle. Now, guards have a higher hit rate. They're one of the best hit rates in really this entire sport, especially in the first round. But it's still a guard versus tackle. So does that push him down the board a little bit for teams? Does it really change much for them? Because they already might be viewing him, as a guy who might have to transition inside anyway. So I think it just depends on the team, right? If it's a team that's willing to try him at tackle, they're probably going to value him a little bit more, even if his arms come in a little bit shorter. If it's a team that has no chance at all of even thinking about playing him at tackle, probably going to be a little bit lower on their board. And I think the Steelers are probably looking at him as a guard if he has 32-inch arms or even less than that, which I'm hoping not less, because then it's pretty much a guarantee he's not going to get a shot at tackle probably. But I think if it's anything 32 and above, there's going to be still some teams that might view him as a tackle in the right scheme and things like that. So.
Yeah, I think it 100% has to affect your evaluation process. It's not a number that can be ignored. I mean, if we look at all of the measurables that you could possibly take at the combine and say, these are the most important for these positions, arm length to an offensive tackle is as important as any other measurement that you will see, because we just don't have evidence of that. Interestingly, the one outlier, and this is like the only guy that has worked at 32 inches, is Matt Filer, former Steeler. Now,
Yeah.
Filer he's started more games at guard than he has at tackle, but he's been very good at tackle, at least a quality or above average when he's played the tackle position, right in that range. Again, though, this is what makes an outlier an outlier. Not everybody that does that is going to be able to perform at a high level. And so it'd be interesting with Skoronski to see where that number comes in at. Certainly affects the evaluation for me. If Skoronski had 34-inch arms, I think he's the 3rd or 4th pick in the draft. I really do.
It's very possible, yeah. Because again, he's
I think he's that
clean as a
talented.
prospect. Yeah, like really he is.
Yeah, I mean, mechanics, the power, the leg drive, everything else that he has, it's great. And so it's just the arms. Where do they come in at? I think that when the week is over and the offensive linemen do their drills on Sunday, I think that people are going to be viewing him as a guard, if I had to guess right now, just based off everything that I've seen. And you can watch him on film, and those arms are short. And so, like you said, maybe somebody tries him there, and if not, they move him inside. And I think that if you were getting a high-end guard, that's still worth taking. It's still worth taking in the first round. It just depends on where, and it moves him down the board a little bit. Shane, is there another player or another measurement that you're interested in seeing at the combine this week?
Well, there's a few that I'm interested, not necessarily for the Steelers, but I mean, everyone wants to see how big Bryce Young is, right?
I knew you were going to bring that up. I'm so interested as well.
Like, it doesn't matter to the Steelers at all. Obviously, we drafted Kenny Pickett last year. We're picking 17th. He's going to be far gone, regardless of his measurements by then. Someone's going to take a chance on him well before then. But I'm so curious. Like, is he 5'10", 190 pounds? Is he maybe 5'11" and closer to 200? We added some weight, maybe. Like, it's just really hard to tell. And on film, like, I've watched a lot of him. He's unbelievable, but it just comes down to some teams are simply not going to even be willing to draft him simply because of his size. And I think ultimately, is that probably a little bit of a mistake, especially with a quarterback this talented? Yeah. But I understand it, because this is just an outlier.
Yeah.
Like you said, outliers are hard to take chances on. And, sometimes it works out, and most of the time, though, it doesn't. So I am curious to see what he measures in at. I think the thing that I'm really curious to see is just some of the length of these corners. Now, this is going to be a little bit later.
Yeah.
Because some of these guys, Joey Porter, we know about, like, he apparently has a monstrous wingspan. Like, I'm very curious to see how tall some of these corners are, and then also how long they are, because I think that's really going to change maybe some of where they shake up in the top 3 or 4 guys. If Porter is, as long as he's projected to be, and he runs well, everything else, like, he might put him ahead of a couple guys. Devin Witherspoon's a guy that I think is probably the cleanest corner, but is he going to test as well? Be as big as some of these other guys? That might push him down boards a couple of teams. Like, that's going to be very fun to see too, how those guys shake out.
Yeah, the corners, that could make or break some of these guys too. I mean,
as far as placement in the draft, yeah.
Yes. In terms of their placement, I think this is a very strong cornerback class
for sure,
overall. Yeah. But some of these guys are so close in that top tier together that perhaps maybe these measurements could separate them a little bit, and definitely the testing numbers as well. If a guy like Devin Witherspoon tests as an average athlete and just has average size and length, and Porter kind of surprises people with his explosion and has 34.5-inch or 35-inch arms. Possibly, some are reporting that is insane. That is insane.
Yeah, so I'll be surprised, but still, it's crazy.
I would be surprised too. I mean, that is like elite tier offensive tackle arms there. So exactly. That's crazy. But I'm interested to see where that number comes in at. Just for the fun of it, if nothing else. We know that he's long, so it really doesn't matter at that point. The one more guy I'll throw out here, Shane, for you is Pitt defensive tackle Kalijah Cansey.
Yep.
So much talk about this guy, and he is so fun to watch on film. Fiery, explosive guy from the interior, but his playing size in college is listed at 6 foot on the dot, 280 pounds as an interior rusher, and he does not have a lot of length to his game. So I'm interested to see, does he come in at 6 foot? Is he 280 plus? And how long are those arms? Because he just doesn't look very long.
I personally think he's going to be a shade over 5'11" and about 275. That's what I'm going to guess.
Such an awkward build for
a
defensive tackle like that.
It's tough, because like you see, there's been guys that you see at that size, and like it's just really hard for them to get off blocks, and it's really hard for them to not get blocked very easily, right? But if he tests unbelievably, which I think is possible, I don't know if he's an unbelievable athlete, but I think he's a very good one. Like, if he tests very, very well, and he can show, and he's shown it on film, and he can get off people and get around people. Like, if he can show that he can play at that height and that weight, I think he becomes an interesting weapon, at least for a defense, because it's going to be hard to keep your hands on him, even with his length, if he's as quick as I think he might end up testing as. So it just comes down, I think it's a preference. If you have a defense that has a lot of multiple fronts, or you just want to have guys who can rotate in and out and give different looks to defense or to offenses, he could be a really good fit for those teams. But how highly do you draft him if he doesn't measure in at really acceptable ranges? Does he become more of like a day 3 pick even, which I don't think is likely because of his production and everything else, but it could happen if he really doesn't do well at the measurements. It could really scare a lot of teams off of him, unfortunately.
Yeah, a guy that's going to measure in like he's going to, whether it's a shade above or below what we're projecting. We know he's small. He's got to test well, but we know that the film is also very good too. And, so I would not be surprised to see him go at late first round. I think that's
it's possible,
not out of the realm of possibility. I think that he's one of those guys, though, that needs the right team and scheme to get him involved. I don't think the Steelers are that team. And so far, with all the players the Steelers have met with, I have not heard his name as we're recording this as one of them. And it's not hard to understand why he's just such an outlier in terms of size. And the Steelers typically look for those tall, long interior defenders. He does not fit that bill at all. All right, we're going to move to our first topic here of the show. If you have a question for us, go ahead and drop it in the chat. We will see what we can do. We'd love to be able to answer it for you if Shane and I can. Let's talk about the biggest notes from Omar Khan's media session at the Combine yesterday. And we'll start with what he said about Mitch Trubisky. This disappointed a lot of fans, you and I included, Shane, because Steelers signed Mitch. They signed him for good money. And he gets benched 3.5 games into his starting career because he wasn't performing very well. And so the fact that that happened and the Steelers gave up on him that quickly, I know they drafted Pickett in the first round, 20th overall, obviously. But is it worth keeping him around at a $10.6 million price tag, knowing that the Steelers could save $8 million of that? Obviously, you got to account for displacement. You got to replace one with the next. And so if I replace Mitch Trubisky with a Cooper Rush or someone like that, I can still maybe net $5 million that I can use towards free agency or to use to sign a player. Is it worth the Steelers doing that? And apparently it doesn't matter what we think anymore because that's what's happening.
I think my biggest problem with it, and anytime you have a situation like this where a player's value is only going to show up if a player in front of him goes down. And there's definitely a ton of value in having depth and having a veteran in the room, all that good stuff. But again, it's a lot of money for a player that you hope doesn't play. And I think that's the issue with this is he's a backup quarterback. And obviously backup quarterback's very important. We've seen teams have their seasons go up in flames because of their backups. And we've seen teams like San Francisco last year, Brock Purdy, has saved their season because of their backup quarterbacks. Now, granted, Purdy was a 7th round rookie, so his contract is a crazy value regardless, pretty much. But I don't believe in paying a premium for a backup quarterback whenever you have a rookie last year and a second-year player this year who you hope plays all the games. If you want a backup who could also start for you, like Trubisky can be that guy, that made sense last year. This year, not as much. It doesn't make as much sense to have him back on a team that's already. It'd be one thing if we had a lot of cap space too. We do not have a lot of cap space. We have to find ways to create cap space realistically to do some of the things we're probably going to want to do in free agency. And there's another thing we're going to have to talk about as well as part of maybe creating or having less cap space with an extension here soon for a certain player. But I just think it's a bad asset management situation where they have a guy who, he can play for you if you need him to. He won some games last year for us. You don't want him to play that. And paying a guy $10+ million to hopefully not play just kind of doesn't feel like a good decision considering where we're at with the cap.
Yeah, I think in order for this decision to be justified, first of all, Pickett would have to go down for a stretch of games, and we'd have to see not only Trubisky come in because the plan is for him to come in. He's got to come in and he's got to hold down the fort, whether that's a 4-game or 5-game stretch. If Pickett were to get a high ankle sprain or whatever the case may be, hopefully not. But I mean, he has to perform well enough. And I don't think that we saw evidence that suggests he's going to do that last year. He was one of the lowest in terms of yards per attempt. The Steelers were, I think, the 2nd worst scoring offense in the league with Trubisky out there. And so it's definitely a little bit concerning. I'm not in favor of this at all. I'd rather have the savings. And this is what irritates me a little bit because I don't think that the Steelers realize how much this really adds up. I mean, just between Trubisky and a player like Miles Jack alone, we're talking about a below average starting linebacker and a backup quarterback who may not see the field at all. That's $16 million in savings. You could throw that money at a Jamil Dean. You could throw that at a Tremaine Edmonds if you wanted to. That, to me, it makes a much greater impact to the team than hoping that your backup quarterback does not have to see the field. And so it's an interesting decision. I can't say I'm surprised by it. It does very much seem like the Steelers' way, but we're talking about Trubisky, who is a quarterback still in his 20s. He seemed a little bit disgruntled at the time that he got benched. And so I think that, yes, there is importance in continuity at the cornerback position, having a veteran that Pickett can learn behind, but I don't understand why that person necessarily has to be Trubisky. Why can't it be an even more experienced player, or at least a quarterback at this point in his career? He knows he's a backup. He does not care about starting. He's there to hold a clipboard and to help Pickett prepare for games. That's what I'd prefer, and I'd prefer to have that guy at a fraction of the price. So that's just me.
Yeah, and to Trubisky's credit, he's working out with the team. He's doing everything right
Yes.
by his.
Yes.
It's just, again, I think everyone knows, and he obviously knows it. Like, he's now firmly a backup for this team. Like, he is not. There's no competition next year. There's no doubt about who's starting. And I just don't think, like, obviously, I'm not saying he'd have a chance to really go win a job anywhere else, because realistically, he probably wouldn't. But he would have a better shot on a team that maybe has either a rookie that they don't know about if they want to play immediately, a team like maybe the Panthers, who doesn't know who their quarterback's even going to be to start next year, depending on what they do in the draft. Like, there's better opportunities out there to win a job than Steelers, obviously. And I think it'd be better for him, personally, to try to take that chance. But Steelers seem, like I said, they seem set on him being on the roster. It is what it is. And we'll see kind of what they do with that from there. So.
Yeah, but now the only question becomes, do they keep the contract the way it is right now? Do they try to extend him and spread some of that money out?
Which I know
I just don't like. No,
I
don't. I don't like to mess with it, but it is what it is, and can't really control it at this point. Trubisky's a part of the team, and that's the plan according to Omar Khan moving forward. Next thing that Khan talked about here was Cameron Sutton, and the Steelers have reportedly began contract negotiations with him. We know that Omar Khan is that finance guy. He's going to try to get something done. Obviously, he's very busy right now with the NFL Combine and other things going on. And that only gives the Steelers roughly 2 weeks from now to get him to an extension before Sutton kind of dips his feet in the free agent waters to see what's out there. If I'm Sutton, I don't really have a lot of incentive to get anything done at this point. I wouldn't think. You could at least test the market and see what it is. I mean, if you look at the free agent class as a whole this year, a lot of cornerbacks, older guys in their 30s who have played their best years already. Sutton's going to be a 28-year-old corner for this season, I believe. And he's one of the more marketable guys out there outside of Jamil Dean. And so maybe he wants to kind of wait and see what's going to happen there. But it's interesting to see if the Steelers are able to get anything done before free agency kicks off.
And the Steelers have a habit of doing this, right? Where they retain their own. They always do. Like, they're not. They don't pay bigger for agency, because normally their big free agency move is to keep their own players. I think I'd be surprised if Sutton isn't back, whether it's on a really pretty fair deal or even like a lower deal than maybe he probably could get. The Steelers just kind of have a way of doing that. I don't know if Sutton's the kind of guy that will try to test. I think it'd be smart for him for sure to test, like you said. I don't think there's any reason outside of just not wanting to leave the Steelers, which is possible. We've seen that a lot with players playing for this team, but it's going to be interesting to see if they can get a deal done prior to free agency, because that's going to be the best way to save some money on the deal, because I guarantee you it's going to go up if he goes into free agency. It's just kind of how it works. I think the problem with this too is I think the Trubisky news, with him being for sure on the roster at this point, from what we're being told, it kind of tells me that their free agency is Cameron Sutton coming back. I don't think there's going to be much else, if anything, going on for the Steelers in free agency, which is disappointing. But I think that's what they're kind of telling us. Unless they move a ton of money around and do a bunch of weird restructures and stuff, they're simply just not going to have the money outside of signing Cameron Sutton and their incoming draft picks to really do much else. And that would be, honestly, especially trying to build up this team after a 9-win season. And granted, they probably shouldn't have won 9 games, but that's beside the point. It would be very disappointing to see them kind of not necessarily take a step back, but not try to fill some holes on the roster in free agency when there's clearly some that need addressing.
Yeah, we'll talk about in a second what some of the things that Khan said during that media session yesterday. And but we'll get back to Cameron Sutton here for a second. I've seen expert projections in new yearly money between $7.6 million and $11.1 million. So quite the discrepancy there. Now, I love Cam, but I do think that Cam is a high-end cornerback too. I still think that Steelers need that true number one cornerback. And whether that comes in free agency or in the draft, they need to get that addressed. And so if you keep Cam, I think you still for sure need another guy. The question then becomes, if we're talking about closer to the 10, $11 million range, at that point, are you considering upgrading? Are you considering saying, all right, Cam, we're going to let you walk, unfortunately, and we're going to sign a younger, longer, faster, better, if you will, cornerback in a player like Dean in free agency, who has been phenomenal his first 4 years. I would be intrigued by that. It would cost more, but if the difference is making that jump from a CB2 to a CB1, could be worth the price difference there, especially if we're talking about something insignificant, as in cutting a guy at the bottom of your roster or restructuring a deal to get that done. It might be worth it. So something to consider there. So let's talk about the next bullet point we have up here. And that is during the conference, somebody asked, how are you going to do? What's your order of business going to be? And Omar Khan basically alluded to the fact that he's going to be a lot like Kevin. And in his own words, I'm going to be a lot like Kevin. And Kevin Colbert is obviously who he's referring to. He was an understudy of Colbert for almost 20 years. That's a long time. And you become very like-minded with the people that you work with when you're with somebody that long. And so some of the things that he mentioned are the fact that, yeah, I'm going to be willing to do whatever it takes to help my team win. And essentially, he didn't say right now, but that's kind of the sense that I got when he said that. And he said that he is not opposed to restructuring contracts. And specifically, he was asked about kicking the can down the road. And Khan said, yeah, I'm not opposed to that.
I mean, again, we kind of touched on it to start the show. Like, they were together for 20 plus years, like you said. Colbert, as great of a job as he did, he had his faults, and I think Khan's going to have similar ones to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think that the influence of another guy we're going to talk about here in a minute, Andy Weidel, will kind of help that maybe a little bit, kind of move him closer to maybe the midline of trying to be win now versus building up the trenches and other things. But again, I'm not going to be surprised if we see a lot of the same type of strategies and contract structuring and everything else that we saw with Colbert. And some fans are not going to like that. I'm kind of lukewarm on it until I see what actually he does any different, because I'm sure there's going to be some differences there. But, I mean, Colbert did build several championship teams. It kind of sputtered out there for the past 10 years or so, and we haven't been able to quite get over the hump. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think if he can change some of the things that caused that, or at least do them a little bit differently, then it'll be fine. But big wholesale changes just probably aren't coming. That's pretty clear at this point.
Yeah. And I think that you and I agree, Shane, that it's all about capitalizing when the window is right. Yes. And I think that ship has sailed these past several seasons for the Steelers. They naively believed that, yeah, we're still going to compete for a Super Bowl when Ben was on the downward spiral, when they had a bunch of backloaded contracts and they couldn't free up money without taking another hit down the road, which is essentially what they did anyway. They made those type of moves, and now we're still kind of eating those consequences from that. My preference would be, let's wait until that window is right, and then let's pounce, and we'll make all the moves possible to do that. And I think that unfortunately that window is probably not going to be for another 2 to 3 years from now. We'll see how fast it opens back up for the Steelers, but that's just what I'm thinking as of now. Let's talk about my favorite thing that Khan said, and that is that Andy Weidel is going to be in charge of creating the Steelers draft board. This doesn't mean that Weidel is going to have the say on the pick. Obviously, and Khan said that that's going to come back to Tomlin and Khan and Weidel, and they're going to discuss that probably together and come to that conclusion of who that player will be. But I am pleased that Weidel is going to have the say in creating that board. He's done some phenomenal work with the Eagles, and you can look at the roster right now. I think the Eagles, they have the strongest and most complete roster in the league. So I'm hoping that some of that is going to translate over to Pittsburgh.
I hope so too. And I do think it's definitely a positive development. It's one of the few from that press conference where it's like, all right, cool. I can work with this, like there's nothing I can really pigeonhole with this, or poke holes in. But I think him being in charge of the board is very big, mostly because he has influence over, okay, these are the guys that we're really looking at. Right? Like he has the ability to kind of set up the board in a way to maybe kind of steer those two in the right direction per se, where, he may have some of their favorite players a little bit lower because he knows they're not really a position of need or they're not, high profile players, but maybe we can look at them later. But look at these guys, and there's going to be a lot of big guys, I feel like, at the top of that list. And that's really the most important thing, is getting somebody either at a really important position or a player in the trenches is really the priority of the first, especially 2 picks, I would say. That's really what I'm looking at. If you go tackle or defensive lineman or
Yeah.
somewhere in that range with your first 2 picks, one of the 2, I'm going to be pretty happy most likely. Outside, there's a couple guys that maybe I wouldn't be happy with, but I don't really think they're in play for a lot of the guys that might not be. But that's really going to be the thing I'm excited about. Is I'm expecting to see a lot more of a focus on the trenches with him creating the draft board initially, at least.
Yeah, I would certainly think that we would see that. I mean, Weidl was there. He was responsible for drafting like Landon Dickerson, Jordan Mailata, Jordan Davis. And so really beefed up Eagles trenches with some mammoth, strong, towering football players. And so I'd like to see the Steelers kind of take that approach again. It's been forever. The Steelers they've gone the longest drought in the NFL without drafting a first or second round offensive lineman. And the defensive side of the ball, it's getting to be the same way, not counting the edge defender position if we're just looking at interior defenders. And so they need help all across there. They need those guys in the trenches to help build that foundation of their team again. One thing that I think is going to be really interesting with Weidl, Shane, and I don't know if this is going to change or not, but the Steelers scouting department is one of the smaller ones in the NFL, and they like their guys in their region. Like they love that Northeast region. And I always joke that Steelers don't know that there's land out west of the Mississippi because they never send guys out there to pro days, it seems like. And so I want to see that expand under the direction of Weidl. There are good football players that you don't want to miss out on. And if the Steelers have a chance to get one of those guys, you need to be able to take advantage. Christian Gonzalez, the Oregon cornerback this year, is a phenomenal football player. He's going to be well over value if he's still there on the board. According to my draft board, I think he's excellent. And so those are the type of players that I want the Steelers to do their homework on. I want you to send your brass out to their pro day, and I want you to thoroughly scout and vet these guys. And it'll be interesting to see if they do that because historically they just haven't. And the only times that they've taken those guys, they typically don't visit with them. They just say, "Oh, the value's too good. Let's take Juju or let's take DeCastro or whoever it is." And so, but I do want them to kind of expand their scouting region a little bit, if you will. So I'm interested to see if Weidl is going to bring any of that. Last thing here, Shane, when it comes to Khan statements, he was asked about that first pick of the second round, the one that the Steelers fleeced the Bears with in the Chase Claypool trade. They own the 33rd overall selection. Now, Khan is going to have all night long and all day the following day to sit on that pick and answer phone calls from other teams to say, maybe we can trade back in this. We don't see the Steelers trade back ever. It's just not something that they do. They've trade up every once in a while. They stand pat most of the time. Do you think that this could actually change? That way we've got some new GMs in the house. Can the Steelers actually trade back this year?
I think it's possible, especially because if they're going to take the approach in free agency they think they're going to take, which is they're going to keep a lot of the guys they have that maybe they shouldn't, and they're not going to have a ton of money, it will make a lot of sense for them to try to accumulate more picks to fill in some of the holes, right? So I think that's going to influence that a lot. I think if they don't come away with much in free agency, either by choice or just not being able to get guys, that could influence that. I think also the biggest thing for them, I think for sure, is who's there. If there's somebody at 32 that they know they can take and no one can jump them, and they really like that player, they're not trading back. If there isn't that player, or if they think they can get that player, 7, 8, 9, 10 picks down, then I think it definitely becomes an option for them to trade down. I would like to see it if they really get the player that they truly wanted at 17, and they're not as worried about past that. I think if they're comfortable with several guys at the position they want to focus on past 17, then I think it makes a lot of sense. If there's somebody sitting there at 32, though, that I think is way overvalued or is just this really important position for them that they haven't addressed in free agency, then I think it makes more sense just to take that pick because you have your pick. You don't have to worry about anybody jumping. You don't have to worry about any of that. Like, you are on the clock, so you don't have to worry about anything else. That's a really powerful position to be in. It's not one we're normally in, obviously. Now this year's a little bit different because it's a second round pick, even though it's 32. Like, it's a little bit different, but you're essentially getting what would normally be the last pick in the first round with this, and you're going to have players available that would normally be there in that position. So it just, again, I think it's about the fit. If the player that they really want's there, I don't think there's any chance they trade down. If they're comfortable with several guys, that's very possible.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that logic. If they're hoping that this guy that they want falls, they say it's an offensive tackle or a cornerback or one of the strong positions in this class, then take the guy. I am interested to see if they would entertain these opportunities if there's not that guy there. Yeah. And I think, again, I'm not a darts player, Shane, but I know Weidl's strategy has kind of been take a big handful of darts and throw as many at the dartboard as you can and hope that one hits a bullseye. Over 20, the 2020 and 2021 drafts, I believe those were the two. I just cut this up yesterday on Twitter. Andy Weidel made 19 selections for the Eagles. That is a butt ton of picks in a 2-year span. So, and he hit on some of those guys too. He really struck gold. And so that's the hope. I mean, Steelers are not going to have that type of capital to work with, but theoretically it makes sense. If the more chances you take on guys, the more likely you are to hit on a big player. And if you go look back at the Steelers draft class back in 2010, where they were able to, they had a bunch of picks. They hit on Pouncey. They hit on Emmanuel Sanders, who ended up having a great career elsewhere, and Antonio Brown in the 6th round with as many picks as they had. It makes sense to do it that way, especially if there's not a guy that you want at that selection. So very interested. I'm going to be on the edge of my seat from day 1 to day 2 of the draft, seeing what the Steelers are going to do. And I probably won't be able to sleep that night just because I have problems. But it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen in that transition. And this should make for probably the most exciting day 2 of the draft that I've watched since studying.
Oh yeah. For the Steelers, especially. Yeah.
If you are a fan of Pittsburgh Steelers football and you'd like to support the Steel Curtain Podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain Podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all your support. And once more, if you want to drop a question to us, please do so in the chat on the sidebar on the YouTube stream, and we will see if we can get to that. All right, Shane, we're going to talk about the biggest players the Steelers have met with at the Combine so far. Now, this is very early. So far, the only ones there defensive linemen, or the only ones that have had the meetings with players so far, or defensive linemen and the linebackers. So let's touch on some of the top names that we have here. We're going to give our quick thoughts on each and how they might fit for the Steelers, and what level of interest they might actually have in these guys. Because again, a lot of NFL teams they're meeting with a lot of football players. You can't necessarily read too much into it, but this is like kind of the starting point, right? Because we got to look at, all right, do you check the boxes in terms of combine meeting? Do you get a second meeting like that dinner meeting that we've seen so often from the Steelers in the past? And then from there, do we follow you on the pro day trail, and do we bring you in the facility? There's more than one box that needs to be checked here, but this is the starter block. And so I'm interested to see where the Steelers go from here, but let's talk about some of these names. First up on the list is Iowa edge player Lucas Van Ness, who also played some inside. I'm really intrigued by this guy, Shane. I went and watched 3 more games of his just this morning, and I came away with a conclusion. I think that this guy is versatile, and I genuinely believe he's going to do his best work on the interior defensive line at the next level. Even though he's supposed to test as a good athlete, we don't know the testing numbers at this point in time, but just watching him, the way that he plays and the way he wins, I don't think he's a very bendy guy, but he is strong and long. He holds up very well at the point of attack. He can stack and shed. And I see some of his best reps come when working inside against guards, where he can just use his length to his advantage and just shed those guys with ease, or blow them back into the pocket. So what are your thoughts on Lucas Van Ness? How do you think the Steelers view him? Because I think this is a guy they might be the most interested in of the guys they've met with so far. They've had one informal meeting with him. And reportedly they're supposed to have another meeting. I don't know for sure if that's a dinner meeting or not, but they're supposed to have another formal meeting tomorrow with Van Ness.
I think the interesting thing with him is his size profile screams big body edge player, right? Like he's about 6'5", 270 maybe. It depends on what he's going to weigh in at. I don't know if I like him as a fit for the Steelers if he's playing inside, just because he's smaller than I'd like him to be for that position.
Yeah.
Even though he holds up well, like you said, he definitely does. It's not a lack of strength or anything like that, but I think that they would be viewing him as like a strong side edge type of player for them. Ideally, I think it just comes down to his testing numbers, like you said. He looks athletic enough to be an edge player for us. I think he does. But if he's a better fit inside, is the Steelers the best place for him to play inside? I don't know if that's the case. I wonder though too, because his draft range is very interesting because he's a younger player. He's a redshirt sophomore. He doesn't have a ton of experience, but again, like especially at edge, like you're looking for traits at edge. You don't really care too much about much else, especially. I mean, Trayvon Walker had very little production. He was first pick last year because he has crazy tools. But I don't know if we would be the best fit for him stylistically, unless he's going to be a true like big body edge where he can maybe come down in passing situations and play inside often. But again, I think a guy like that, I don't know if I'd be wanting to take him where we'd have to take him because he's going to go probably even maybe earlier than 17. If he does make it to 17, you're going to have to take him there if you want him. Don't know if that's the right player to take on the defensive line if you're trying to beef that up for what we're trying to do. But he's really talented. It's kind of hard to really disagree with them if they're super interested in him.
Yeah, essentially, Shane, and I've done a lot of research on Van Ness already. He basically has 2 years of college experience. Interestingly, his tape from 2021, he played the vast majority of his snaps inside as a true defensive tackle. He's not big, thick in terms of NFL standards for that weight. He's probably going to come in at the 270-ish range at the NFL Combine. Don't have those numbers, like we said, as of now. But it's interesting because I thought he held up very well. And I thought almost all of his splash plays came from when he was playing inside. As a true edge player, he is a little bit stiff. He rushes a little bit upright. I don't love him for that. And again, I don't know if he's an ideal fit, but it's worth considering. Cameron Hayward was a base end player at Ohio State before he came out. Stephon Tuitt was a base end type player in that front for Notre Dame before he came out. Those guys played a lot of time on the edge as oversized edge players who really made that transition to the 5 technique, the 4-eye interior defender for the Steelers. And so it's interesting to see, is this a guy that's close enough to make that transition? I kind of view Van Ness as like the A+ version of a Preston Smith, a guy that you can play base in running downs on the edge, and you can flip him to rush inside in more passing situations. It just depends on, can the Steelers get creative with him in that way? Do they think that they're not going to have to be creative with him because I can put 15 pounds on the guy and have him be my Stephon Tuitt?
That's the question
next
too.
To,
can he maybe put on some weight? Yeah.
Now, pound for pound, I think Van Ness is incredibly strong. I think you see that on film. He barely gets pushed off the football. Yeah. And so I don't think the weight is as big of an issue, especially if he's got 34-inch arms, 34.5-inch arms. I mean, you have that frame. It's just putting some weight on. It's worth noting as well that Isaiah Loudermilk at the NFL Combine weighed in, I believe, at 274. And yet
really?
he's
that light.
He was small. I got it right here. I can pull it up in a matter of seconds. But yeah, it's interesting because it's not a one size fits all thing. I've got Loudermilk's weight right here. He was 274 at the Combine at 6'6". And so, yeah. And yet he's that 5 technique, the interior defender guy. But Van Ness is a much stronger and much better version of that type of player. And so it'll be interesting to see what they get. I have a feeling he's not going to be there. I have a feeling somebody's going to draft him. They're going to leave him as that true base edge. Maybe he can be like that Ziggy Ansah type where you are a little bit stiff-hipped and long and tall, and yet you still find a way to win anyway because he's a good football player. But interesting to note, Steelers brought him in. I don't want to dwell too much on one player here because we're going to go right down the list. We'll move to the next one, who's kind of in the same type of mold, but a bigger player who's less of a question mark about his position, and that's Bryan Bresee from Clemson. Interesting guy here because at some point, Shane, even just a month or two ago, we saw Bresee as a guy that's like a top 5 or 10 pick. And now we're seeing him as late as the 2nd round. Where's this guy going to go? I know that there's a lot of varied opinions on him. He is the big, long, athletic, more of a slender type interior pass rusher. He's got some quickness to his game, lacks a little bit of consistency, but where do you see him falling? And what do you think his fit would be for Steelers?
I think the thing that's going to hold him back the most as far as getting drafted high is the injury history. I mean, he's just had a rough go of it.
Yeah.
And granted, some of it is stuff like, like a kidney infection or is like weird stuff that's not really related to like actually football injury or anything like that, but just a rough go of it in college in terms of being able to get on the field consistently and stay. But when he was on the field, I mean, you see the flashes of a guy who could be a dominant interior player, especially as a pass rusher. Mm-hmm. But again, I think it comes down to, are you worried about his long-term health? And some teams, that's going to be big for him. Medicals. What does it look like? I think if he comes out of the Combine and does very well, and I think if his medicals check out, he could be gone before 17 pretty easily.
Yeah.
It just because that range for him is really going to be based on, I think, like how confident are you in his medicals coming out of the Combine? Because it's so big for a lot of teams and a lot of players that have that injury history. Is, do you get a green light? If you get the green light, a guy like this, if he tests well, he does well, he's going to get drafted probably top 15, if not top 10. So it's going to be hard for me to say whether the Steelers can get him. I think he'd be a great fit for sure. I think he's more of that full size, full body interior defensive lineman prospect. I think he'd be a better fit compared to Van Ness, but I think Van Ness is probably a little bit better of a player, maybe. So again, you're splitting hairs there because again, you're talking about a guy who is the full size player. You don't really have questions about his fit. It's just again, is he going to be healthy? Right. That's kind of the biggest thing for him.
Yeah, for sure. And if you just put on a highlight reel of Brazil, you're going to be impressed. I mean, the guy has
moves
exceptionally rare. Yeah, he's just a rare breed of football player. When you're 6'5" plus, which is I'm assuming is what he's going to come in at. It's what is listed at 300 pounds plus, and you got 34-inch arms plus, whatever that is. I mean, you don't get many guys that are in that mold. He's got some Chris Jonesy type traits to his game, and so that goes a long way. That's very, very valuable. And if you can refine that, and if you can stay healthy, it just depends on that. And it'll be interesting to see if the Steelers express more interest in him beyond this point or not, because I can kind of see that fit. They do like that mold of player. Now, I don't think he's probably as stout as like a Hayward into it in terms of like run defense
probably
coming out, but he is an exceptional athlete though. And I'm interested to see if that interest continues on the part of the Steelers. Going on to another interior defender. This one is the easiest for me to see how he fits in terms of, do the Steelers want to replace Stephon Tuitt? And obviously I think that they do. Gervin Dexter from Florida. My goodness, does he fit that size profile at 6'6" plus 312-ish pounds? With the long arms, with the ability to two gap and hold defenders at the line of scrimmage. You're not getting an elite pass rusher with this guy. You are getting some pass rush presence, but you're also getting a guy that's incredibly stout, who can stack and shed. And so I think he does a lot of those things that Tuitt did as that 5 technique, as the 1 technique for the Steelers. I certainly can see why there would be interest on the part, and the Steelers have reportedly met with Dexter so far at the combine.
This guy is very fun to me because he has the size profile, like you said. It's a big 6'6", 310 plus pounds. And it's not always there, but when he flashes his pass, like when his pass rush flashes, he moves unbelievably well for his size.
He does.
Like it's really kind of like it's not always there, and I think that's the problem. Right? He's a younger player. He's 21 years old, I think, right now. I think he's redshirt sophomore, if I'm not mistaken. He has some ways to go, I think, and I think that he's probably going to be drafted a little bit later, partially because of that. Because you also don't know, like, is he going to be an above-average pass rusher? At this point, he isn't, so it's whether or not you think he can be. But the physical tools are certainly there. You're not really questioning that whatsoever. So he's another guy in this class that I think fits that mold of, like, you draft him because you think he can at least be that, like you said, like two-gap, like bigger-bodied guy. And then can he become a pass rusher? Can he be that guy that develops into at least, a guy who can get you maybe 30, 40 pressures from that position every year? That's really valuable. And if you can get that in like late day 2 or wherever he ends up going, like that'd be super valuable, I think.
Yeah, Dexter, I'm very intrigued by him. And I think that we're looking at him is that maybe starting with that first pick in the second round to somewhere on day 2, if he's still available with their other picks there. But very intriguing skill set, does not have very good college production, and you're projecting him forward. But the Steelers are going to like what they see because of that size and length and anchoring ability there. Certainly an interesting player. This next name, Shane, this is one of the most interesting players I think that's going to be at the combine this year, is Mike Morris from Michigan. The guy, I mean, we don't know his official numbers right now, but ESPN has him listed at 6'6", 292 pounds as an edge player. I don't know if he's going to stick there or not. He certainly looks like a good enough athlete where he could do that. He's just so big that I think he'd be more valuable. That skill set and that size and length would be more valuable going against guards with significantly less length and where he can just get right up into their chest. I'm intrigued by what a team is going to do with this guy. And if the Steelers were to land him, I mean, I don't even know if you mess with him at edge with how big he is. Maybe you just throw him along the interior defensive line and say, hey, you're transitioning and you're going to play next to Cam Hayward here soon. So have you watched any Mike Morris at all yet?
I've seen some of his Michigan tape for sure. I think the thing that's interesting for him is a lot of the same things that people were saying about Rashawn Gary when he came out about, is he too big to play edge? What is his position? Is unlike with Gary, where I don't think that question was warranted. I think it is with Morris about, is he too big to play a true edge rusher position, because he's not the same level of athlete. He's a very good one, but Gary was a different specimen in his size, being able to still play stand-up edge. I do think Morris's best fit especially if he went to the Steelers, but in general, is to play inside most of the time. I think you could get away with playing him on the edge on rundowns because of his size. I think you could get away with that because he's a good enough athlete to stay on,
Yeah.
and be a liability if there is a pass situation. In that situation, he can get out and defend the edge. But I think he's going to be more valuable, like you said, for sure, as an interior guy with that size and length. It's going to be hard for guards to handle a guy like that, especially who has edge rush ability. But you put that inside where he is going to be more valuable from that perspective as a pass rusher. I do wonder about the run defense a little bit, regardless of where he plays. Again, I think edge should be just a better fit because he's going to be bigger than a lot of the guys that he has to deal with, especially if he's on a tight end and run game, anything like that. But outside of that, I mean, I think he'd be a super valuable rotational player, especially early on. It's just can he develop past that is, I think, maybe a bit of a question mark.
Yeah, for sure. And the few games that I watched on Morris so far, Shane, he does rush very tall from the outside because I just don't think he's going to be a guy that gets very good leverage that way. Now, he's a strong football player. He can drive people backwards, but the bend and ankle flex and stuff is, it's not going to be there. But again, that's why I think a guy like that with that skill set is more valuable inside, because in terms of edge players, he's not going to be a special athlete probably, but you move him inside and he becomes a phenomenal athlete compared to undersized pass rushers from the interior. And so definitely an interesting body there, interesting guy to watch the NFL Combine, a guy the Steelers have reportedly met with. And the next one on the list is one we've heard a lot of connections to the Steelers. This is Shane's guy here. It's Keanu Benton. Shane, I'll let you go ahead and start on Benton.
Yeah, I just mocked him in the Steelers mock draft for Steel Curtain recently with our pick at 80. He's just a guy that I think is a plug and play nose tackle, right? Like, exactly what we're going to get from him early on. I think he's going to be great in the run game. He's going to be very stout. It's just, can he develop into more of a pass rush? And he showed more of it his last season with Wisconsin. So I think the potential's there. I think in the same way that Dexter has some potential as a pass rusher, I think Benton also has that possibility as well. I think Dexter has better physical tools, so you have a better chance of him becoming like an above average pass rusher. But with the way he handles the run game with Benton, if he just becomes even like an average pass rusher from his position, he's going to be very, very valuable and one of the better players on the defensive line for a long time for us if that happens. I think he'll be there at 80 because he's kind of viewed as that prototypical like two gapping, like true nose. It's just not as valuable of a position as it used to be, or even now with the way some defenses are there, it's becoming more valuable, I think, truly. But it's still a pick that I think he'd be available for at 80. It'd be really, really good value for a guy I think would start for a long time for us.
Yeah, like you said, there's still a lot of value in that type of player, and the Steelers haven't had that these past 2 years because Tyson Alulu went down in 2 games into the 2021 season, came back, was not the same at all. And Montrevious Adams could not fill the void. I kind of view Benton as, if he turns out, I think he can be kind of like Alulu was from 2017 to 2019 for the Steelers, where he's that stout guy, not going to wow you in the box score, but going to hold up at the point of the attack and be able to get some pressure on the quarterback at least. I was impressed with him at the Senior Bowl. I think that I think that he's a guy that's he's certainly an interesting player there. If I had my choice, Shane, I would take Gervin Dexter.
Just more upside. There's more upside.
I think, that's exactly right. I think that frame and that the skill set that he has is a little bit more rare than finding that nose tackle who we know what we're getting and hoping to get a little bit more in terms of pass rush. But both good football players and both apparently on the Steelers' radar. Let's shift gears here. Let's talk about some of these guys that are more of true edge players here. And one that Steelers have met with, surprisingly, is Nolan Smith. Now, Steelers, obviously, they've got 2 good edge players in TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith. We don't know the long-term future of Highsmith at this point. And so maybe Steelers are doing their homework, say, if this guy is good enough, and if he happens to fall to us at pick 17, is this somebody that we're going to consider?
I think it's interesting because, again, they've already tied so much money, justifiably so, to TJ Watt at edge. It's really hard to pay 2 quality edge players, or even, especially one who's going to be highly paid for quite some time. I mean, he's going to get surpassed, obviously, over time because his deal was earlier. But when you're paying TJ Watt as much as you are, and Highsmith is coming up, if he has another season at the quality that he had last year, he's going to get $20+ million, like he is. And I don't know if we're going to be willing to pay him that and even be able to pay him that. And I think that's kind of the problem. So edge is a bigger need than people think, simply because of the logistics of it. But also, we've seen what happens when TJ Watt goes down and maybe Highsmith is just not really playing up to his potential. We don't rush the passer worth anything when either one of those guys are not playing, or that they're just not playing well in that particular game. Having a true third guy, even if it has to be a third guy, even if you have to take him at 17, this year would maybe not be the most impactful thing. But again, if Highsmith balls out again, if he has 10 plus sacks, if he gets a lot of pressures, some team is going to be willing to pay him a lot of money, justifiably or not, depending on how you view it. I think he's a much better candidate than Dupree was to get a big deal and actually turn out. But still, it's going to be hard to pay both of those guys. It's more likely they're going to have to move on. Let's get that guy now, and we don't have to worry about it then. And I think Nolan Smith, he's a smaller guy than maybe they probably would normally like. He's about going to probably play at 240 at the most. But he is violent. Like he brings all 240 of that every single play at you. And I think that's part of why he's had an injury history and some issues there. But he's a guy that if he works out, he's going to really work out, I think. I think he's definitely one of those kind of higher floor players if he stays healthy, because he's going to be really good in the run game despite his size. He's got the pass rush tools. He's a former 5-star prospect. He's got all that going for him. And I think that's something the Steelers are going to really like if he falls to them. And the other players that maybe are bigger needs for them aren't there, or the value isn't there. He could be on the table. It's definitely possible.
Yeah, I think he checks all the boxes, and he's a guy who projects forward with even a better NFL career.
Yeah,
I really like Nolan Smith, and I'm a fan in general of great edge defenders because I think there's so much value in that position. I think after quarterback, you can start making the case right there that that's the next most important position in football, depending on the team and how they're utilized. But I've said this before, Shane, for the Steelers having their team essentially revolve around TJ Watt and his health, it's absurd that they don't take out a better insurance policy for him. Now, I don't know if that necessarily means that they need to spend a first-round pick on the guy, but I would not be upset with a player of that level being taken there. And it gives you, I mean, if you take Nolan Smith, Highsmith is going to be gone. I just don't see the way that you can keep them both. But at least for this coming year, when Highsmith's still under contract, you can have a remarkably strong pass rush and give yourself a chance, and then have that guy set up for the future. Seems like maybe a little bit of a luxury because Highsmith is there.
Right.
Maybe they go day 2 with finding that backup edge because they desperately need that guy still. But an interesting decision to meet with Nolan Smith, and maybe it's just doing their due diligence here as well. Other edge rusher they met with is Auburn's Derek Hall. You're kind of a guy in the Highsmithy type range, 6'3 plus, 245-ish range there, and a guy that doesn't have supreme size, but he does have good length, and he's a pretty good athlete on the outside, rushes from both sides on Auburn's defense. It's kind of one of that stand-up edge rusher. And so just kind of an interesting name there. I think he's a day 2 guy for sure that they'd be looking at, and one that would certainly offer more value than any guy outside of Watt and Highsmith they have at that position.
Yeah, again, if you want to go a little bit later with an edge pick, which I think is probably still the best use of resources, is to target somebody with maybe the last pick of day 3 that we have at 80, or maybe even in day 3, get some guys who are true, like guys who can at least set the edge and be decent in the pass rush. It's probably more likely that you're going after a guy in this mold or even later. I know that in the mock I did, I had KJ Henry from Clemson in the 4th round as a guy that's kind of like a prototypical third edge guy. But they need to do something. I do think it needs to be addressed. If it's not in the draft, it better be for agency, but I'm more likely expecting it to be in the draft with a later pick. Hall would be a really good fit. I think he's kind of in that Highsmith role, or that mold, so you already know kind of what you're getting with that type of player. I think he'd be a good third player, especially as a rookie. You wouldn't have to rely on him too much. You can come in on passing downs. But again, I just think it's going to be how much do they view that as a problem, because they clearly haven't for the past few years. They have not cared at all to get any depth. I'm hoping that changes, but it's kind of hard to project that at this point.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I would be really, really surprised if the Steelers don't either sign a quality edge in free agency or get one in the draft. You cannot go into the season with what you have. It's not good enough. You need at the very least, that taco level player that they had, or someone who can offer that sort of pass rush as that third edge who doesn't have to play a lot of snaps, but you do need to rotate in to spell your starters of snaps, and you do need to be there in the event of an injury. And so they need that guy for sure. And who knows, maybe they do need to start finding the replacement to Alex Highsmith, depending on how much money he's going to make next offseason. Let's shift over to linebackers here. We're going to fire out a few linebackers before we close up the show for today. The first one is probably my favorite linebacker of this class, Shane. Drew Sanders from Arkansas. This guy flashes, and he's got some remarkable skills. He's going to be a really good athlete. He's tall. He's got size. He can rush from the interior. He can rush from the outside. He can flip his hips and cover. I like his skill set a lot. And I've seen him likened to Tremaine Edmonds because he's that kind of like freakish level player. And I think he's going to go high. Unfortunately, if I had to guess right now, Shane, he's probably a guy that falls between their first and second round pick, their first pick of the second round. I'm not in favor of taking off ball linebackers in the first round. It's something I'm very opposed to. I just don't think there's enough value there. And we talked about that a few weeks back when we said how many of those guys are worth trading your first round pick for in the NFL. And we said, not very many, not very many. You can count on probably two fingers how many are worth trading your first round pick for, especially considering having to pay them massive contracts with $20+ million a year after that. So we're looking at these linebackers here. Tons of value in linebacker, though. It's kind of like the running back position. If you find a good one, you can plug them into your defense. They can play right away. They can get excellent value on their rookie deals. And so I'd love for Steelers to address the linebacker position. I'd love to be able to get Drew Sanders at pick 33 if he is available there, or with one of their 2 second-round picks. That's being optimistic. I don't know if he's going to be there, but it's interesting to see the Steelers have some interest in this guy.
He's definitely my favorite, mostly because, like you said, he has a lot of versatility. This was a guy who was an edge at Alabama for 2 years before he transferred to Arkansas. Really kind of flashed as a middle linebacker for them this past year. Still has that pass rushing skill set. I think that's one of the reasons why maybe I could justify, not at 17, you'd probably be looking at a trade back scenario from 17 to make it like actually a value. But he could theoretically give you some edge snaps early on. I think not in the same way like Parsons or Michael Parsons for the Cowboys is a different animal, but like in the same way that he has that versatility, Sanders can play edge a little bit for you if need be, especially at his size. And it's just, he has a ton of just get off and athleticism for that position, especially at linebacker coming from that edge background. He's just an interesting player. And I think he's the best candidate really especially these first like 4 or 5 guys that are being listed in linebacker to be a true 3-down player at some point. I think he does still have to work on his coverage because he just hasn't done it very long. He's only been a linebacker for really a year at this point, but I think he has the most potential to play all 3 downs very well of this group for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I like him as an overhang edge rusher, blitzing the B gap. Like I said, turning in coverage. I think he's instantly becomes the best coverage linebacker on the Steelers
by
day one. And that is not a hard bar to clear, I don't think, right now.
Helpful, so,
yes, very good football player. Next on the list, Noah Sewell from Oregon. This is like your old school type linebacker here. Big guy. I mean, he's got decent movement skills for as big as he is. I think he needs to cut a little bit. I don't see the value of playing at that big in the NFL. We'll see what it comes in at. He's going to be in the 250 to 260-ish range. That's really big for an off-ball linebacker. And so I think he's a good football player. I think he deserves to go somewhere on day 2. It just depends on where that is and who else is on the board. Certainly would help improve Steelers linebacker situation. I'm not exactly sure at this point. I'm going to watch Sewell some more, but I don't know if he's a guy that you can stick out there and say, yeah, play all 3 downs for me. I kind of view him more as the very good on first and second down, and then the maybe not so good or maybe bordering on a liability on third down in terms of coverage. But again, that's the mold that Steelers like for some reason. It's the guys that they draft outside of when they took Shazier. How do you view Noah Sewell?
Again, it's hard to play linebacker in the NFL anymore at like 250. It just is like it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is just because, again, it's hard to cover well at 250. I think he has enough movement skills where he's not guaranteed to like never be able to cover anyone. I think he has the size to match up with obviously some of the tight ends and stuff like that just because he's so big, but can he stay with them is the question. I think if you draft him on later day two, and just ask him basically to be your first and second down hammer and then blitz on third downs, be the guy that just kind of collapses the pocket from blitzing perspective, I think he'd be very valuable. But that's probably his best role. And again, how early do you draft that? Probably maybe early third round, maybe late second round is probably the earliest I'd consider a guy like that. And that's just because that's with the hope that he becomes somewhat valuable on passing downs in some way, whether again, like as a blitzer, or can he cover some guys at least maybe for you respectably. That's really what it's going to probably have to be for him. And he has the bloodlines obviously with his brother with the Lions. Like, so he has that going for him. I know teams love that.
Yeah.
But again, I think it just comes down to how early is he drafted. If he's drafted a little too early, he's probably going to end up being considered disappointment. Even if he does everything I think he's going to be able to do, just because he got drafted too high. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think you and I kind of share the same thoughts on him. More that old school type guy. I think he would have been a lot better in the NFL like 15, 20 years ago.
Oh, for sure.
Still has a home.
Pick 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, he's that type of football player. Yeah. So certainly a name to watch there. Two more names on the list that we have for you before we close out the show today. Henry To'oTo'o from Alabama, a guy that doesn't have exceptional size or exceptional athletic traits, but a very instinctive football player who can really diagnose and get to the football. And so an interesting football player here. I think that he's got pretty good film. And another one of those guys who are probably looking at like a mid to late-ish day 2, if I had to guess right now. But interesting to see the Steelers visit with him.
I think if all the linebackers that are in that range, right, from our second round pick to pick 80, he's probably the guy that if you needed to draft somebody to play for you right now, he'd be the one to draft, because I think he can play right now. I think the question is he going to be able to be more than like a maybe slightly above average inside linebacker? Maybe not, just because again, the size, the athleticism, neither is terrible, especially by today's standards, but it's not exceptional. I think the instincts, though, and like you said, he has all the intangibles of that position to be able to come in and play well. The Steelers need that right now, so I wouldn't really be hesitant at all to take him, especially pick 80. I think pick 49 is a little too rich, but if he can make it all the way to 80, and maybe we've already addressed offensive line and we've addressed some of the other positions early on, that would be a really good value pick, I think, because you'd get a starter, I really think, early on with him at pick 80.
Yep, I agree with you there. Certainly, I think there is some strength to this class for sure on day 2 at the linebacker position. That's what you like to see. I do think that Sanders. I think that Sanders is a tier above that group. And then Trenton Simpson's another name that I like with that first, second round pick.
Need to cover somebody.
I know. As of now, we haven't seen the Steelers meet with him, but I would think that he would at least be on their radar. Last name on the list, Shane, of Steelers meetings so far. And again, this is early at the NFL Combine. We still have to do we still have to do all the other positions. We just did defensive line and linebacker so far. Ivan Pace, the linebacker of Cincinnati, short, compact, physical, little guy, and he is so exciting to watch. I mean, I watched this guy at the Senior Bowl. He does not lose when blitzing and trying to be picked up by a running back. I mean, you just can't do it. And he kind of already said that in a presser at the Combine, where he's like, "You don't come to try to block me with one of those guys. You got to send a bigger guy after me." And so he's very confident, very physical football player. I don't think that at least what we've seen from his tape, doesn't offer a lot in terms of coverage. But my goodness, if you want that Vince Williams type of guy that's going to come downhill and thump you in the hole, that's Ivan Pace.
Kind of sounds like somebody else that we picked up last year.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does.
I think that's kind of part of the problem. Is I think he's very similar to Mark Robinson in that way, where when he's going forward, that's really fun. When he's not as fun. And I think that's okay. I think a guy that's going to be drafted and where he's probably going to get drafted is totally fine. I think he is super, super fun. Like you said, he's a guy that every special teams coach, every defensive coach in general, they're going to love his tenacity and the way he flies around. Can he be more than a role player? Probably not. And that's fine. You're not drafting him to be a full-time starter probably. But I think he's kind of redundant if we're looking at him. I think if we draft him late in the draft, it's going to be kind of like I said, you're just having him and Mark Robinson fight each other to see who's going to be the guy who runs really fast and hard at the offensive line, which, I mean, again, I'm not going to discredit him or say that he can't do maybe a little bit more than that. But again, we'll just have to see if that ever transpires for him. But still fun to watch still.
The one thing I know, Shane, is he's going to be a Tomlin dog. He's going to check that box for Mike
Tomlin will not have any problems. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. But the Steelers got a type. They got a type. I hope that type kind of shifts to guys that can cover a little bit here in the near future.
You got to get one. All right. Like
you got to have.
If I could make a deal with Tomlin right now, it's like, listen, I will allow you to draft 3 hard-nosed middle linebackers every draft if you want after the 4th round, but you got to draft one who can cover somebody. I'll do that. That's fine. That, just let me have that, and I'll give you all the other guys you want that are 6th rounders who probably can't play, but you like them, so it's fine.
Yeah, I know. As much as we love the physicality, I think that we're all waiting to see that guy, that next guy who's going to do that. All right, that's all the time that we have on this show for today. Thank you for joining us on the Steel Curtain Podcast. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube. And thanks for listening to the Steel Curtain podcast.